Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Zoe Evans, and I manage the Less Lawn, More Life campaign. This is the sixth webinar in our challenge series, and this one is all about closing the loop. So, why you should leave the leaves and fallen branches, but also what you can actually do with them all. Today's expert is Edwina von Gal, the landscape designer to the stars who makes art and sculpture from the same twigs and leaves that most people bag up and throw away. Before we bring Edwina on, let me just give you some quick housekeeping and a rundown of what we're going to be covering. So, this webinar is hosted on YouTube. Don't forget to press the like button if you enjoy it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more great content. Pause and rewind are enabled, so if you miss anything, you can go back and watch it. We're going to share links for mentioned resources in the chat throughout the webinar, and we encourage you to use the chat and comments to ask questions and to engage with each other. So the plan is I'll give a quick overview of what Less Lawn, More Life is for anyone who's new or just joining, and then I'll hand it over to Edwina for the main event, and we'll close with a Q&A. So quickly, for those of you who don't know us yet, Less Lawn, More Life is a free 12-week challenge. Each week, we send you an email with a small doable action that adds up to real change on your piece of earth or balcony that you have agency over. So you get expert speakers like the one you're going to hear from today. You get a free yard assessment, and there are prizes and badges at the end. And some of you are maybe really deep into this. You're already at Challenge 10, and some of you could be starting week 1 today, and that's totally fine. If you haven't joined, you can join anytime, and you'll always start from the beginning. And the important thing is just that wilder is healthier. So that's for you, your kids, your pets. That's what this is all about. And this wouldn't be possible without the incredible organizations behind the Less Lawn, More Life Challenge. These are our key strategic partners who are providing the expertise and the resources that make this campaign possible. Edwina's organization, Perfect Earth, is one of our partners, and we're so grateful for all of the resources that they've created to help everyone have a more ecologically friendly yard. And here's a snapshot of our nearly 200 regional partners. It grows every week. There's watershed groups, HOAs, land trusts, native plant nurseries, landscape designers. So this is really grassroots. And if you know a local organization that should be part of it, please encourage them to join and help promote the campaign in your community. In addition to today's webinar, we have some more incredible experts lined up this summer. Recordings are available of all the previous sessions, and coming up, you'll be able to learn even more about how to talk to neighbors and HOAs, which you'll hear a bit about from Edwina today. And then in August, we're going to have a whole webinar dedicated to thinking about how to create a whole hard yard layout. So if you're signed up for the challenge, you'll be invited to all of these, and they're all free. And in addition to the expert webinars, you also have access to our free companion app called Wilder Places that supports you in the challenge. You can download it, put in your address, and you'll get personalized native plant recommendation based on what's actually native to where you live and ranked by how much they support pollinators and the food web. And you can also do things like track which species you've planted or you want, or show off what commitments you've made, like that you leave the leaves or leave the woody debris or you don't use pesticides. So without further ado, I will love to introduce you to our guest, Edwina von Gal, who has been designing landscapes for decades, collaborating with architects from Frank Gehry and Maya Lin to creating gardens for clients like Calvin Klein and Larry Gagosian. She even designed the park for Panama's Biomuseo with Gehry himself. She's the founder of Perfect Earth Project and the 2/3 for the Birds campaign, and she has a gift for turning what most people haul to the curbs, those leaves, branches, spent stems, into something that's sculptural and alive. She's spent years teaching everyone from clients and homeowners to professional landscapers that this kind of care isn't just good for the planet, it's also beautiful. Edwina's work has been featured in the New York Times, Vogue, Architectural Digest. She's given an incredible TED Talk that you should check out, and Wallpaper named her one of the top creatives in America. So, Edwina, thank you for being here, and let's dive right in.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you so much for all that you're doing with Less Lawn, because after all these years, it is happening. Hooray! Right for you and your amazing audience. So yeah. Yes, I run Perfect Earth Project, and I run it essentially from here. This is my backyard, and the beautiful thing about my backyard, which is a protected salt marsh, is that I'm not allowed to touch it. So for 25 years, I've been sitting here watching it, and I have learned so much from it. And good news and bad news comes from the marsh because I'm watching sea level rise and all the effects that and how the marsh is responding. And there are tremendous lessons to be learned from that. But also, I have in my view the gift of an osprey nest, which is also a reminder of things that we thought we'd fixed when we got DDT banned. That was within my lifetime, and things don't have a way of necessarily staying fixed when it comes to humans. And now we have this problem, and probably you all know this, but always like to try to remind people because it's so present in terms of everything we do. Birds are our best key indicator species, but also there is aquatic life. That is highly affected too. Why is all this happening? You guessed it, loss of habitat, use of pesticides and fertilizers. And because the human population has expanded so rapidly that we're moving into all the areas that used to be inhabited by wildlife, and they just sort of don't have any place to go. And we think we're doing the right thing, but this is a classic example of loss of habitat and use of pesticides. And more loss of habitat, and more loss of habitat, because as sweet as most people might think this landscape is, if you were looking at it from a bird's eye view, there is nothing here to eat. No place for you. No place for insects. No native plants. That lawn is suspiciously looking very too perfect. So where is there this? And if without that, we don't have this. And so how can we bring all these things back into our landscapes? And in a way, this critical moment in our history is kind of it's kind of an amazing reminder, because I think without it, I don't know whether my landscape design practice would actually be going in the direction it's going. I think that this is like a real smack upside the head, but it is pushing me to do this, what I'm doing right now. And it's exciting and it's amazing. There's so much to be learned and so much to be done. So what Perfect Earth is called perfect. What does perfect do? We create conditions conducive to life, because we're looking at what people say perfect lawn, and we're saying, well, maybe not so perfect. And that's why we drop the vowels. And one of the basic concepts when I started doing this, I was always trying to explain to people what I was talking about. And I used to say, well, we're talking about non-agricultural lands, but that's kind of negative. And it's really important, I think, to make the distinction. So before I dive into the rest, here goes. So we distinguish living lands from working lands. So working lands are essentially agricultural. Working lands are extractive. So what you're growing is food, fruit, and fiber to support the human species. When you take things out, you do have to put stuff back. Living lands, on the other hand, that's my home ground. Living lands is where we rest and recreate, and we do it for pure pleasure. But the trouble is that through the years, living lands have been managed much the same as working lands. In other words, nobody's allowed to eat any of it. And yet we're not eating it. So how does that work? How does that work for all more than human lives? Because they have to eat something. And if we're not letting them eat here, where are they eating? So what we ask everybody is make 3 promises to your living lands. The first one is kind of the base for everything else. So that's the one that we really ask people to do that is key, which is to absolutely say no to fertilizers and pesticides, because the other 2 fall into line. Then you plant 2/3 for the birds, which means 2 out of 3 of your plants are either native or extremely high-performing, low maintenance. And the third is closing the loop, which is the main thing I'm here to talk to you about, because people find it difficult. The 2/3 of the closing the loop, that's a lifetime of exploration and interesting, creative, conversation with your yard. But it is all based on that idea of creating conditions conducive to life, because when you interfere with fertilizers and pesticides, you're disturbing the web of life. And there are repercussions that you can't possibly begin to altogether understand. And so, starting with that, just a little brief background on it. So, okay, number one, no pesticides, no fertilizers. How does that work? Basically, if you don't know what it is, you shouldn't kill it. And if you're not going to eat it, why can't something else eat it? That is your yard. Your yard is a banquet. Are you sharing? And then closing loop up, that's, I've got this backwards, but throwing away the land that the produce that your land made. Keep in mind, this isn't agricultural. This is living land. It shouldn't leave. Those grass clippings are the food your lawn made for itself. So why are you throwing them away, putting a burden on landfill, using all of that fossil fuel, and actually usually paying the landfill to take them? And the 2/3, actually not just the plants, but the entire property. Can 2/3 of your property actually serve wildlife? So how much lawn is too much lawn? Well, think of it that way. If 2/3 of your property goes to your house and your terraces and your driveway and maybe a swimming pool, if 1/3 rather, and then the rest is for, think of it as habitat. The rest is habitat. So what is habitat? Habitat is, in my words, a safe place to eat, poop, multiply, and die, because that's what we all do. But now, in Paul Hawken defines this as the carbon flow, and that's a lot more eloquent than my version. But the problem is that humans have taken the poop and die part out of the flow. So how do we try to restore that as much as possible in our property? So our properties, no matter how tiny, are an opportunity to step into this amazing cycle. It's quite incredible. And so, but people say to me, well, I don't know what to do with all my leaves. What the heck am I going to do with all this stuff if I cannot get rid of it? So we all know about leaving the leaves, and a lot of your leaves can just stay where they are. But I agree, it can be too much, especially oak leaves. They're really hard. So I've been making these things that do two things. Not only do they take care of the leaves, but they take care of all the branches that fall out of the trees in storms. And rather than drag them around, I make nests with them. And into the nests go all the extra leaves. Because actually, we should not really be chopping our leaves up. I think more and more people are recognizing that now. I used to say, oh, just run your lawnmower over them. Fine for some that you're going to put back into your lawn right away. But that is the home of a lot of your moth and butterfly populations and other beetles and things that really need those leaves. That's where they live through the winter. So, but these also, actually, these leaf baskets do three things. They use up twigs. They give your leaves a place to be all winter. Ideally, they look really beautiful depending on how crafty you are about making them. And the third thing is they're smothering something. So underneath one of these is a bunch of garlic mustard, and under the other one is some stiltgrass. And the other thing that you can do with twigs, because these are my black cherry trees that they're pretty, people don't like them because supposedly they're messy. But I think that is a constant, interesting opportunity to have like something. So I started just picking up the twigs and arranging them, sticking them up against each other. And we already did a little thing with with Wilder on this. And a wren moved in, and she's in there every time my terribly scary dog, and I walk by. And but she's in there. Her little wings are just the right span to flit around in there and be safe. And that is so much about what habitat piles are. And a lot of people are talking about habitat piles now. And so how can we do them in ways that maybe work in our landscapes? Because people say, oh, well, I can't have that in the middle of my neighborhood. That's not going to work. Well, it could work, because this is what they did at Garden in the Woods. They brought in an artist to say, okay, let's explore ideas for what we can do with the twigs to entertain, the visitors and give them ideas they can take home with them. And I think this is incredibly beautiful. And I have a little habitat pile. It's tiny, that I just happened to create under some trees, and it just lives there. Like, I almost think like it actually like comes to life at night, maybe. Because and this can happen on a small property. It's all about looking intentional. I'm not particularly fussy about how mine looks, so they're kind of wildly random. But if you are worried about what people will think, well, make it more organized and make it more beautiful. Here's one at Longhouse Reserve. It's an art garden, so they did it quite a bit more organized than mine. And Great Dixter, never to be outdone. Great Dixter is one of my favorite gardens in the world. It's in England, and they have one of the highest levels of biodiversity of any garden anywhere. And they don't actually focus on native plants, which was a really interesting learning experience for me. But we'll have to probably save that for another day. But they focus on actually habitat. It's all about habitat. So they just invite everything in that can find a place to live. But they also focus on the fact of the human component. So I love the fact that everything they do is about their apprentice program, and how the humans together with the habitat, with the elements, is this wonderful combined story. And if you say, well, that would look really weird in my landscape, but what if you then took what they did to the next level and grew nasturtiums all over your habitat pile? Why not? And because there's always another way. And what if you're in a city? You could do this. Because just there are ways to continually make things feel more comfortable to people, but also comfortable to the potential inhabitants of these spaces, as well as returning all of the incredible biome and nutrient that is embedded in this biomass going back into the ground. And another thing that I was used for sticks, what you can't necessarily see easily here, but there's a log lying down. Actually, that log is a tree that's alive, and it blew over in a storm. And the roots at the base were flipped up in the air, and it's a big bump. I couldn't get a picture that really showed it, how much of a bump it was. And this is the space where I enter my back of house area behind my shed. And so it's got a lot of wheeled traffic and a lot of foot traffic. And it was just a big muddy lump. And I didn't want to cut the tree down, and I didn't want to chop its roots off. And so I took a bunch of cedar twigs, and I did an imitation of what would be a larger scale in a national park as a corduroy road, where they take trunks and lie them across the muddy spots in the trails. And this is a miniature version, and that's with catalpa flowers just to make it look extra pretty. But actually, it's growing in really well, and it still takes a lot of traffic, and it's doing it. And another thing to do with excess cedar twigs is we make sawhorses and use them to redirect traffic when we do garden tours and things, or keep people from parking in places that they don't yet recognize is actually a garden, because it is a new idea for a lot of people, and they really don't see what doesn't look like that little garden that I showed you earlier. That is what people see as like landscape, and they're starting to recognize things. But that's kind of my job. Our job is to help people start to see things differently. How can we see this as beauty? Nature defined beauty. Nature doesn't do ugly. So how can you always touch back to nature for what is beautiful and reuse everything? So cedar trees are very ubiquitous here on Long Island. They're pioneer trees. Most of Long Island was abandoned agriculturally during the First and Second World Wars. Now those cedar trees, which were the first range of the pioneers are being shaded out by the next succession. And so there's a lot of them are dead in the woods and they start falling over and things. And so it's a perfect opportunity for me to find great sort of craft opportunities. And so we make arbors, and I made a treehouse for my grandson, which is imitating an osprey nest, and it's actually pinned into the live trees as well. There's a stump of a dead tree. The rest are live. It's actually pinned in with rebar, so it's held on these pins so that when the trees move and grow, they work independently and the whole thing sways. A friend of mine made the slide. He's an artist. It might be the world's only bronze slide. It's pretty dark, great. And then here's another arbor we made with old trunks and sticks and things. And as they fall apart, but we're always like just rebuilding them. And when things fall apart or when I have just too many twigs, we chip them. Oh, you can see here underneath, that's a path, that's wood chips. So that's like the next iteration of what to do with all this stuff. Well, what to do with a grass path that is getting shaded out as your trees grow? Well, the next step is turn it into a wood chip path. And we're actually experimenting with creating chips from all juniper, all red cedar. So, because in hopes that it might be a tick repellent, because cedar oil is one of the tick repellent oils. So check back with me on that one and we'll see how it's going. We're trialing it. I've got a tree guy who's every time they clear a cedar patch, he's making a dedicated cedar chip pile. And regular chips, though, more like the oak chips and all, I got a morel out of a pile of oak chips. The trouble, it was only one. And I was so waiting for it to come back, and they haven't reappeared yet, but I'm ever hopeful. But there's always all kinds of, I have stinking horns, I have all kinds of crazy mushrooms coming out of my wood chip paths. But one of the things I'm asking you, please do not do with your chips, is to heavily chip your planting beds, because actually the chips are a growth inhibitor. And so these poor plants are going to have a very hard time ever creating a co-joined community and actually working on their own to keep the weeds out, which would be your standard, maybe soft landings planting, something that is green mulch, that is 100% planted. And then under there, you can lose so many leaves in a planting like this for the winter. And that by the spring, they're gone. And then I pull them out of the baskets and I add more. And so I have a place to keep chips, because if I don't have enough, the tree guys know they can always dump some here, and as well as some logs, because when my property I first bought it all those years ago, it's a quarter of a century, it was filled with incredible amounts of vines, like all invasive vines. I didn't even know what was in there. So on the weekends, I just started window painting them, which means you cut them high, you cut them low, you let the rest fall out of the trees. It took a number of years. And I used to ball up the vines that I cut because I was removing a lot of habitat. And I roll them all up and create these big sausages of vines for the rabbits and things to move in there. And then at first I had a lot of dead trunks and a lot of invasive trees that I could use, and I wanted to manage. So I cut up a lot of another thing to do with grass paths that are starting to show wear and can't manage the shade. We make tree cookies, which is just thick slices, like 4 to 6 inches thick, and slam them into the ground. The one on the right, you can see, is already starting to biodegrade, and it's feeding the biome in that soil. And I think of the mycelial network coming in from the sides and everybody having a party with my tree cookies, like a little dessert moment. And then we just keep adding more. And the other thing with the logs, I make log walls. So this is an old photo early in the game when I was making walls with all the logs and before I was really ready to start planting the hedges and things and cutting the meadow constantly because it kept resprouting. It wanted to revert to bittersweet and Rosa multiflora. It desperately wanted to. And so I had to keep cutting it. And I just kept heaping all the stuff I cut in this pile because it wasn't really going to make good compost if it contained a lot of weed seeds. So I just let it sit there and let it continue to like also smother whatever was under it. And today that log pile looks like that, the log wall. I'm not sure, I'm still deciding whether I'll just let it continue to completely disintegrate and have nothing because I never did put the hedge in. So maybe it will be time to put the hedge in, or who knows what will happen next because it will be really great soil under there. And another thing I did with a chunk of wood that had some character is I made it into a step because the stone step was too high to be a good step, and I made an extra step out of wood. And this is something my friend John Danzer, who owns the furniture company Munder Skiles. So we were out redesigning his showroom, outdoor showroom, and he had all these trees he had cut down and he turned them into a fence, which I thought was incredibly inventive. And then when I cut trees down, rather than rip the stump out of the ground, stumps contain so much energy, so much incredible life and incredible nurturing stuff when they're dead. So I just leave them in place. And sometimes I'll stick a house plant out on one for the summer. I actually planted this one with Fragaria, the American wild strawberry, but it kind of preferred in the ground. So it's all these things went out into the ground all around. But you can see the ferns and some caryxes are really, really happy there. Or you can leave dead trees just where they are. And if you don't have, if it's not over your car or your house, and they provide incredible amounts of life opportunities for all manner of animals, especially birds, because where did cavity nesting birds live before we were here to build them birdhouses? They lived in trees, and if we take the trees away, it is their preferred housing. So once again, Fergus the Great Dixter, because people say, well, I don't want a dead tree in my yard. And I say, oh, you'd be surprised. There's a way. You can do it. You can do it. Because this is an incredibly beautiful flower bed. It's probably not my world's best picture, but it does illustrate what he let this thing be. And when you're in the garden, it does not feel like it was a mistake. It's really a celebration of the last gasp of this old tree. And there's a park that we're working on. It's a restoration of a sand plain grassland, a Long Island grassland. And in it is the tree that we left because it's really incredible perch for the raptors. Generally, I'm surprised I could actually manage to take a picture that doesn't have the birds in it. Because but I wanted to show you what happens as a snag returns to the earth, because actually it doesn't just fall off all at once. And you can see here, this is a picture I took a couple weeks ago, how the small bits fall first, and then the smaller bits and larger and larger and larger. And yes, you don't want to stand under it in a storm. That bench there is not actually under it. That's an illusion. But little by little, it will fall apart and it will go back into the soil. The reason I use this photo with this strange angle is in the foreground was an unintended benefit from the pathways that were installed, which is turtle nesting. It's right on the edge of, as you can see in the previous photo, it's on the edge of a tidal pond. And so turtles come up to nest, and they nest in these, so that we're being a little careful about weeding this for the moment. And so then when the tree actually gets so old that you do feel it's a bit unsteady, I went out, this was one I had in my yard, and I just pushed it over in the direction that I wanted it to fall, and it's been years, and that it's slowly been decomposing and feeding more things. So there is a scientific study that I read once that said that trees promote more life for much longer time, like 10 times longer after they die than when they were alive. So 10 times more species and 10 times longer than they're living. So they never die. But let's say you don't have a tree to do all this with. And John Little at Hilldrop in England, he does this. He's so amazingly inventive. And he takes a branch found somewhere on one of his jobs, and he just sticks it in the ground, and he drills these incredibly beautiful holes of different sizes to act as a bee habitat. And so it's a wonderful craft project. And I'd like to think it could work on anybody's property. And then this is at Knepp, the home of Izzy Tree's rewilding experiment, which is quite remarkable. And everything there is turned into some kind of habitat. So, and this is made with found wood, a tree trunk, and a bunch of grasses. So, which brings us to the fact that, okay, there's not just woody debris that you've got to deal with in your landscape. In fact, there's a lot of grassy and herbaceous debris that people don't know what to do with. So this is part of one of my meadows, which is also a native Long Island grassland, which wonderfully occurred quite spontaneously when I stopped mowing, because it turned out all of the old seed was right there. And the soil was so poor, not much else was going to grow anyway. And so, and every year I cut it to arrest its succession. And so one year during COVID, we actually did it with a scythe. And that's Tim Erdman. He's at Chanticleer now. And so we were distancing. So I'm up and he's away and we're distancing. And it was so the sound of the swish of the scythe, because what we do when we cut the meadow is always cut it to some extent by hand, if you can call a weed whacker by hand, but never use a mower, because we don't want to scalp the tops of the clump forming native grasses. And we don't obviously want to kill any birds' nests that might have gotten in there early, or turtles, or all the other things that are nesting in there, all the fireflies, everything. So we try to cut it really high, and we try to cut it really gently. And then what do you do with all of that? Because you got to get it out of there. And so we make things called Romanian haystacks. They don't typically come with a giant hole in the middle. This happened spontaneously one winter. I have no idea but how it got there, but it just seemed like it's just how working with what you got can always bring you incredible surprises. And once again, not to be outdone, the haystack that they made at Great Dixter, which was, I was there when they were making it, and it was such like a community thing. Everybody, there were people standing on top, people tending it, people, and it was just such a joyous occasion of building and creating. And then there's your pollinator garden, which you're, of course, leaving all those seed heads up all winter for the birds. And then in the spring, though, you cut them. What are you going to do with them? So I tend to create more piles and kind of arrange them in a way. This one is actually being used to smother some mugwort back in the garden, and it'll slowly go back into the ground. Ideally, by then the mugwort will have given up. And here's one at a very big meadow garden that I worked on with Avi Lawless. And so they have so much that in 3 years, they've made 3 separate stacks. But by the end of the 3rd year, stack number 3, or whether, I guess that would be stack number 1, is pretty well fully decomposed. So that can be used to as compost on other parts of the property, and a new stack is made. And it's just like my compost pile, because what do you do ultimately with all the other stuff? You compost it. It's all different forms, really, of biodegradation. Basically, whatever you do, if you find a place to put it and leave it there, it's going to rot. It's going to go back in the earth, and that's the goal. Just get it back in the ground somehow. And so this is the 3-bin system: new, medium, old, and keep greening, browning. But so I add leaves through the winter from my leaf baskets, throw them in there with this as I cut everything in the garden. And if we turn it now and then when I get around to it, I have never had a hot compost. And I hope everybody feels fine with that, because I used to feel really guilty about, why can't I make a hot compost and kill all the wheat seeds and do it perfectly? And I actually found out from various people who do get hot compost that it takes a concentrated effort. This is beyond me. So don't feel bad if it's beyond you too. If you really want to nerd out on compost, go for it, but you don't have to. The thing you do want to do is make sure that you do not put weed seeds in your compost. So make sure that when you take things, that you try to cut things before they go to seed, if they are invasive. But if you don't get around to it, put them in a place, what I call in one of my corners of shame. I have all the places that I never got to and someday will. But now they can, these are my corner of shame. And I call these the sucio piles, because sucio means dirty in Spanish. And it's that's where we put all the sucio stuff. So if it's something that's probably going to root, that we don't want to root, sometimes if it's not massive, I'll throw it in a tub of vinegar water first, just to, add a little insult to injury, and before it goes on the pile. But they're in the back there, and if they sprout, we can just whack them down and just keep beating it back until it gives up. And in the end, this soil will be nicely enriched, and maybe someday I'll get around to doing something there. And then there's also soil and all the other stuff that a property produces that you don't know what to do with. So I dug a little pond a few years ago. And what do you do with a heap of subsoil? And what do you do with all the leftover bits of concrete and maybe the parts, the wooden, trunky things that you just can't make anything out of? So I also had this other side of a story, which was that the men who work here and help me with the garden are all from South America. And in South America, there are a lot of poisonous snakes. So it is cultural to kill snakes on site before they bite you. But here on Long Island, we do not have one single kind of poisonous snake. So I could say with confidence that we should be protecting snakes, because the snakes are the best way to control the population of white-footed mice. They're the reservoir for tick-borne diseases. So how about let's promote a pest population here, a predator population to suppress a pest population. And so the guys got engaged. And so all of the old stumps and concrete went in the middle to form air pockets, put the soil on top. It wasn't particularly stable, so we threw some grass seed on it. And down at the bottom, you can see on the left at the bottom, the little doorway they built out of some leftover concrete block. And if you look really closely at the bottom on the right, the thing that I actually never really expected it to work, and there's a snake there headed in, and it's a garter snake. And the guys took the picture. They were so happy. They were so proud of this. And since then, we found some milk snakes too. So we're waiting for a black racer. And here's the little pond I made, because part of habitat, all of these things are about building habitat and getting stuff back into the soil and creating this amazing flow of the web of life. So this pond is not lined with plastic. I do everything in my power not to put any plastic in the ground. And it's lined with clay. Took a bit to find it, make it work. It's really gooey, but the plants root right through it, so it cannot leak. And actually, the sides are quite dark. And so in the winter time, the sun melts it around the edges, so there's always water. There's always a water source for all the wildlife, and all I do is recirculate it. So I don't do anything more. There's no inlet, no outlet. I've never filled it, and it stays amazing. It's just got its own little world of life. But one of the things that maybe all you have is a swimming pool, but actually swimming pools can swimming pools are more about that human thing, like, can you create something around your pool? Because people are attracted to water, just like animals are. And so how can you use that to actually be in touch with so this was one I designed for a client. They thought they were getting a giant lawn around their pool. Didn't work out that way, but they love it. And and the other thing, but like going modest, a simple little bird bath. The one on the left has a little finch that used to come every day. That one I'd have to keep it filled myself every day. But you can see I filled it with gravel, so the finch, is not a water bird. It just really can't handle it. People like have to really be careful or think about the fact that a deep bird bath is not for all birds. And on the right is something that I've sort of made up, and I call them bee beaches because bees have even shorter legs than birds, and they do need a lot of water, and some of them need mud. And so if you find a container of some sort, this was an old cracked stone trough, so the water just kind of runs off one side, and I filled it with mud and some water-loving plants, and that faucet just drips ever so slowly. So that's probably in this garden, this is a client's job. It's probably one of the only places in the garden that gets watered, so I don't feel bad about having it dripping all the time, but the birds love the sound, and so you can see there's some of the native equisetum in the background and fun things that you would not otherwise probably be able to grow. And but doing it, I'm not sure if this oh yeah, this might run. This is an experiment for me to actually add a video, and I think it's working. So just to show how, I was hiding so the birds weren't scared, and but it works. You just have a little dripping water out there, and all day long, there will be birds. They will come. But also other wildlife comes too. You never know. So this was charming until it wasn't charming. And so after a while, the deer population on my property got out of hand to the point where these cherry trees, which I planted before that happened, would never have survived with the deer population I have now. And in fact, all that you can see surviving there is some grass and some non-native mulleins and a couple of milkweeds. So I decided that, okay, this has to stop. Because I was beginning to see that all around the everywhere that there were heavy populations of deer, there were zero populations of our native forbs. And what was I going to do about that? And so I decided, because there's a limit to like habitat here, if only one particular species is overwhelming all the others in that habitat. So I put in a deer fence for about half of my property. And this is the fence, if you can see it. And it's sort of me deciding. So this is what is the human role in when we're gardening, when we're creating our living lands? What is the best role we can play? And do we play, do we take over, or do we try to listen to nature? It's a tough decision that I have to make, that we all have to make all the time. So the way this deer fence works, it's made out of, it's like one of my best inventions. It's a panel that you use of metal mesh that is used to make sidewalks, and they come in 5x10 sheets, and I set them on side. And either I welded a little angle iron to make this frame where it's fancier, but you can just stick some rebar in the ground and tie it on. 4 feet doesn't work. It's got to be 5. And if you look possibly really closely behind it, you can see that there is a set of rebar with rope. So the deer could jump this, but they will not jump into the rebar and rope. And the more shrubs I get and everything on the inside, the less they but they don't come in. But what those 6-inch square openings allow, foxes, everything else, every other animal can get in. So I feel that I've only kept one kind of predator out of my garden, and the difference in what I'm growing now is just incredible. Like that, so people can come and see the difference between deer, no deer, and I try not to preach anything, but it's just it tells its own story. We have a problem. What are we going to do? Because that's like who gets to eat. So what is a predator? You know, who's the predator here? And it's just this conversation all the time, making choices. Like, do you want to kill mice with a rat trap that then kills the birds? Like when you interfere with the pest predator relationship, do you know what all the consequences will be? And so if you're providing owl habitat, then you will probably be able to create a pest predator cycle that is healthier than using a poison. And wouldn't you love to have owls on your property? Of course you would. But the idea of like, what are we? Are we pests? Are we predators? Or are we partners? And I think that that's true of everything. So that we decided after 100 million years of trees living all by themselves, perfectly fine, that we know better about how a tree should be cut and taken care of. I'm not sure. And so, and also like a lot of predators are beautiful, like an owl, like a bluebird. This is a beautiful pest predator relationship. The thing that we like to say is that you don't have a pest problem, you have a predator problem. So if you have a lot of a pest, do you recognize what the predator is? So I'm assuming most of you know this. On the left is a ladybug larva form. And on the right is the ladybug. And that ladybug is munching down on aphids. But if you killed the larval form, that predator, because you thought it was as bad as the aphids, or you started killing the aphids, that whole cycle would crash. So you'd keep getting aphids because you would never get the predator population to show up and eat the aphid population that never had a chance to actually become a meal. A few years ago, I was getting a huge infestation of tent caterpillars, and Doug Tallamy happened to be around, and he said, don't touch them. They are the best food for the yellow-billed cuckoo, who is entirely shy and very elusive, but you can hear them, and I did. So how do you design for all of this? How do you make this happen on your property? It's about planning to some extent. So plan for letting go. This place was not planned letting go. So if you look at these trees, if you don't have a constant pressure of noise and poison on this property, this garden is done, over. It's not this garden anymore. But this is the garden that people are designing for now. So could we, and this is the kind of driveway, do you see that one little leaf there? Totally out of place. What are you going to do? Come in with a blower, get that leaf, quick. So can you rethink it? So this is my driveway, which no problem with leaves, no problem with weeds. I just drive on them and they're gone. And there's a snag up above that's raining down some wonderful pine cones for my fireplace and the whole thing. But so how do you build a landscape that absorbs these responses so they actually look like they belong there? Front walks are a really good place to put some like visual order into it. And then like whatever happens, happens. And it gives it this rigidity. This is my garden, but for clients, we do get a little bit more, a little bit more organized. But each of these plants, each of these trees has the full opportunity to grow to its intended natural shape and size. And this was a client I had that, needless to say, you can tell from the architecture, they were not really nature types, but they bought a place in this incredibly beautiful piece of nature, which they love. So I just made sidewalks for them so their feet never touch the ground. And their entire landscape is an exact replica of the woods around them, almost zero maintenance. And a lovely front yard from Refugia, and another one here, a friend of mine. Let's just rip out your front yard and make it all habitat. And how could you take a little old house and so within this context, all these other things can happen. Yeah, she could have a snag here. She could have a leaf pile here. One of my most favorite places ever anywhere is Manitoga, Russell Wright's house. This place was built so that the ferns outside are replicated by tropical ferns inside. There is a big rock outcropping inside the house. When he died, they had no money. It took them a number of years to create a foundation to preserve and then restore the house. By the time they got to it, the garden was intact because it was completely at one with the place. So how do we talk to people and encourage them to join us in this? So one of the things is people are always asking, how do I explain this to my landscaper? How do I tell my neighbors what's going on here? Well, so we have created a thing called Landscaper Language. It's just up on our website, and you can find it there. And it's all of the things that are sort of our basic things about creating these 3 basic promises and explaining to people why we're doing it in a non-threatening, non-aggressive way, because it's really about pulling them into the stories. All these stories about, isn't it exciting what I'm doing? Here's why I'm doing it. And one of the things that we just keep in mind that everyone, everywhere, every life form has to eat. And if you start from that point, so people come to my garden, I want them to see all these things I'm doing, all my leaf baskets, all the habitat piles, all the things that I'm doing to create amazing habitat and return and close the loop and create a soil biome and everything that is 100% undisturbed. And what do people ask me? They want to know what they can eat. They head straight for my vegetable garden. And it used to make me really nuts because it's like, oh, that's not really what this garden's about. And then I realized, yes, this is a common language. This is a lesson for me that this is the common ground. This is where the voice we share. So how do you find the voice to share? Like my guys and the snakes and your neighbor, there's got to be something. Everybody has a point. I think if you just keep talking, you'll get there. But it's never about approaching them with a lesson you need to teach them. It's about engaging them and drawing them in to something that you're doing, and the fact that you're doing it, and the fact that you're having so much fun with it, and it's creating all these magical moments in your garden. Ultimately, everybody else will do it too.
Thank you so much, Edwina. That was incredibly inspiring. So we are going to jump right into some Q&A of frequently asked questions, and I think just reiterate a couple of the incredible points you made in that. I think, one thing that is the question everybody asks, and it's happening all over the country, not just here in the Northeast, but is about ticks.
Mhm.
And so can we go back to ticks, and can you just double down on why bringing in more predators is helpful for keeping ticks in line and what people can do without using pesticides to protect themselves from ticks in their yards? And are these natural yards more, tick habitats than a smooth, pesticide-treated lawn? What would you say?
I would say to the last point, yes, they do harbor more ticks. There's no question about it. And in my mind, nature is sending us some messages, which is that we're out of balance. So whenever there's a population of any life form that's out of balance, we need to look at why. Why do we have too many ticks? Why and what is happening? And hardly anybody is really looking at the cause. And they're all trying to hit the effect on the head with a very big hammer, which is pesticides. And our insect populations are plummeting. They're here on Eastern Long Island, everybody's talking about it. Like this summer, there are very few insects in our gardens. And the only thing that is proven to work is the thing that nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to hear this from me. They don't want to hear it from the experts, but it's all I have to offer. Spray yourself, check yourself. So when I go out in the garden, I don't necessarily every single time, wear socks and tuck my pants in and do all of that because I'm just running out to, take a little moment of peace out there. But I do keep a can of spray right by the door. And I use one that does contain a chemical. It contains picaridin, which is listed by the Environmental Working Group as the least toxic but most effective. The natural oils are less effective in that they don't last so long, so you have to reapply a lot. Spraying your yard with natural oils may be less dangerous for you, but it's just that is a non-selective insecticide, so it will kill or repel non-target organisms. So they're really not good for bees and butterflies. It's harder to kill a tick than a bee or a butterfly. So yeah. But so what you might try to do is like not dive into the edge conditions are favorite tick habitat. So where you have a grassy edge, make your paths really wide so that ticks do not fall out of trees. That is not so. They live in probably within like 3 feet of the ground, and they'll be out there questing or running along on the ground. So they like those edge places where they can get back into the shade quickly. But there's no question that they're like my nemesis. Like there is no lecture, no encounter I can have with the public that they don't want to. It's like, I guess it's like the food thing too. It's like can we get back to can we get back to maybe how we might solve this problem?
And I think that that's the perfect answer because, I mean, you did say it. It's bringing more predators in. And a lot of the ways that you used of repurposing this yard debris was actually about creating homes for what people often think of as unwanted guests of snakes and of not owls, really, unless our developer has an owl living in his attic and he doesn't want it there. So you want to bring the owls outside. But bringing in those more predators to reduce the populations of, as you said, the white-footed mice that spread the ticks is so critical. And then, yes, taking care of yourself. And the design point you made, I think, for folks is ticks don't want to move generally more than 3 feet to get their prey. So if you have a path of, what would you say? Like, how wide would you make a path if somebody's really worried about this? And we're just handling this question at the beginning to get it out of the way.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's 3 feet vertically.
Okay.
Because they can only spend a little bit of time in the sun before they go back down. The Lone Star ticks will actually travel so that if you spray your property, they'll come from next door. They'll come right in because you've just opened up an opportunity for them. If you've killed your resident population, then hey, and the spray only lasts a certain amount of time, and they'll just move right back in, or and people don't stay home all the time. Like the only way you could actually be sure is like pave your place and never leave home. And I think because they say that one of the tick Carey Institute that did the tick study, the big tick study, they found that there was absolutely no reduction in tick-borne diseases in sprayed properties versus unsprayed properties. And the reason for that, they hesitate to really drill down on because they didn't do that study. They were but they're guessing that people get less fastidious about checking when they are spraying. And
Ah,
so
all
they're,
right.
yeah,
So
they
we all
think
need to incorporate into our routine just a daily tick check. I know I'm doing it now,
absolutely.
and it's yeah.
And yeah, I mean, you put sunblock on, right? So
Mhm.
why not just put some repellent on?
Great. Well, thank you, Edwina. So you have incredible examples of making beautiful art, and I think sometimes I go out into my yard and I look at it. I don't quite. I don't know what to do with things. When you go to a new property and you're looking at it, what are you how do you assess a space? How do you get inspired? Like this could be a great place for an arbor or a brush pile. Like how do you think about how to look at a space and where you might put something that could be both art and habitat?
I've been doing it so long. That's a really difficult question because I don't know. I think that part of it is, in a way, I have become kind of like part of the vocabulary of places. Like, I think that the more you look at places, the more you can read a place. And it's one of the things that I hope can be taught that we're starting Earth. The Perfect Earth is starting something called we're calling the Earth School, and it's one of the things we consider one of the fundamentals of actually helping people help their properties, which is observation. How do you look closely? And it's like raising children. Every place is different. Every place has a voice of its own. But I think it's really key to recognize, like, where am I? Like, what's happening in this area? How far from natural is this property now? Like, where would it be if it had never had human intervention? What might it be like? How can we bring it back to a place that it wants to be? So how can we reduce in, like, long-term, fighting nature
Mm,
to make it what we want it, as opposed to how much can we allow it to be what it wants to be? Because that and then what do we do in subtle ways to make people feel like, "Oh, it's a garden."
yeah, yeah, both the signaling intention, as you mentioned earlier, and I love that the not fighting, and so thinking like an ecosystem in some ways. I think you mentioned earlier not putting wood chips down as mulch in areas where maybe there wouldn't naturally be decomposing bark. And so would you recommend using leaves as mulch in those areas, or like if people want to add, kind of things to keep the moisture in the soil, what would you recommend in their like garden beds instead of traditional mulch or wood chips?
Well, I use leaves, and I mean, and there are chips that get in there because, broken up branches and all sorts of things, but I try to avoid using any imported materials. Obviously, that's part of closing the loop.
Mhm.
So, you have chips that you've made, like, what happens in my chip paths? Because my garden, I use chips for the paths in my garden, and over time, they start to break down, and then they go into the compost pile, and then they get recycled and back out again. So it's all part of this ever evolving cyclical birth and decomposition, because the chips do become that, but just when they're raw and fresh, they are they lock up nitrogen, and people put them on very deep, which is also not great. And so, yeah, you do need it is great to compost with something,
Mhm.
and and leaves are excellent for that because they do break down quickly.
Is there a case when you don't recommend leaving the leaves, or, people will look at their remaining patch of lawn when they've reduced it and they say, "Should I leave it here?" Is there a depth, like any guidance you have on that? I know there's a lot of folks who are just getting into this who need very beginner, like, what do you recommend? Do you leave all the leaves? Do you ever not leave them?
Well, I don't leave them on my lawn areas because, there's a limit to how much leaves, because the leaves might stick together, they pack down. So we'll rake those into piles, and that's what goes into the baskets. I also can't leave the leaves on my moss garden because you just that leaves kill moss. So I sweep them off. I actually use a very, very low energy electric blower that kinda goes and it's perfect because I tried using a fancy Japanese broom, a moss broom, but I must say this, like, sad little blower, it works better, but, um but you do have to keep your leaves off your moss, and so all of those go into the basket, and then the leaves in the basket come back out into my beds, but a lot of what falls down just stays in the beds. It's that whole soft landings goal is just let them fall there, have plants that can receive them. I think a number of people, I think like Rebecca McMacken has created a list of plants that are better and some that are worse at living under leaves. Like, apparently she says Tiarella doesn't make it at all. I think I've proven her right, trying trying. and failing to get to your hella to grow, and the leaves fell on them. But there's a lot of the bigger ferns. They're great. Like the more leaves, the better.
Great. And for folks who might look and say, wow, you have a really big space and large property, and I have this small yard. Do yards ever produce more than they can handle in terms of biomass? Or what, can everyone
Well,
do something like this?
we are actually trying to create a community response to that. And because yes, I hear it all the time that like there is no place on my property where I can have a a compost heap or anything. Like, yeah, I'll have a composter for my kitchen, but I can't deal with all of this. So we're actually creating this an experiment to gather that from our members. We're calling it a CSCC, community supported clean compost. So that it'll be a community composting area that if you're a member and you have made the commitment, there are no chemicals in anything that's coming out of your property, that we will compost it for you and send it back.
Beautiful. Very cool. And so we'll share a link in the chat for how you can find out more about that program.
That's in process. I don't think it's not yet. Keep sign up for our newsletter. Keep listening, because once we build the model, we are hoping it would catch on in a lot of places. Yeah.
Great. And if anybody's already doing that in your area and you want to send Perfect Earth your experiences with that, maybe that would be something you could share back.
Oh, yes, that would be great.
That's wonderful. And so I want to ask just quickly about the landscaper project. A lot of folks are scared maybe of talking to their landscaper and asking them to do things differently, and they're scared that I think, like, I've gone through this personally, that they might just leave me and I won't find a landscaper who's willing to work with me. So what do you recommend for initiating these conversations, or if you are afraid of it, like how to have the confidence to go into those conversations?
Well, the main thing is that we have a program here where, supported by our local land trust, that sends someone to your house for free for an hour to talk to you about how you can transition to a perfect living landscape. And what we find in most cases, we ask them to have their landscaper there for the interview, and most of the time it's financial. They're worried about losing the business. So they're worried in two different ways. One, they have been told so many times in most places what a landscape's supposed to look like. And ultimately, that's what I call the Botox landscape. Like it's frozen in time. It can't express any emotion. It's not allowed to change. It's not allowed to age gracefully. It's stuck. But that's what clients are comfortable with because they don't understand the language. And that's what landscapers also don't understand the language. They don't know the names of the plants that they're dealing with. They just know that if I keep the line straight and the leaves nowhere in sight and everything is swept clean, that it looks like their living room, and their living room looks like a dead room. So, it's just a really cascading downward spiral of non-life. But they think that if they do anything other than that, number one, they won't know how. And number two, they'll probably get fired, because once the homeowner sees what's going on, they're going to hate it and they're going to get fired. So part of the landscaper language is that the homeowner says, I agree to this. I am saying right here and now, you will not be fired. I will have clover in my lawn. I will have leaves in my bed. I will have insects nibbling my leaves. I embrace all this. This is what we're doing. And these are things that if I don't pay you to do that, here's something you will do instead. And the thing that's really wonderful is that landscapers are starting to recognize that this is like possibly a good future for them. And that working with clients who are asking for this is giving them a skill set in a way for free that they can market.
I love that. I think that's all about, our next, what's our next economy is the restoration economy. We all have to be boots on the
Yes.
ground here, solving this. And that's really beautiful framing of how to think about approaching that conversation. So thank you, Edwina. We'll share all of the resources for all the incredible things that you've created and that Perfect Earth is building in the chat and in the notes of the description. So, and thank you so much for being here. This was such an inspiring webinar. I know I've got a lot of projects now in my mind. Particularly, I want a woody debris arbor is my next step. So if everyone can come away from this webinar with one idea from of something you could create in your yard that's an art and a habitat, that would be awesome. Put it in the chat. We'd love to see what people are going to create.
I would love it. Don't throw it away.
Yes, exactly. And send us photos. We'd love to see pictures. And we'll share them back with Edwina. So please send us photos. So we're going to close out here. I'll just share one last slide. Which has the links to join the Less Lawn, More Life Challenge. So if you're not already a part of it, we hope you'll join. You can always join, and you start at step 1. And then if you are represent an organization or members of local organizations or even your HOA, share the challenge with them and invite them to be a partner. Invite them to spread the word, because this is all a community effort, and it takes all of us to make this change. So thank you, Edwina. Thank you, Perfect Earth Project. And thank you all for being here. This was such an honor to moderate.
Thank you.